Mike Anderson yawned, stretched, and looked at his phone. The clock showed 4:35 p.m., and there was another order in the taxi app. It was his 10th today, and he planned to work a few more hours before heading home. As a driver in New York City, he had long been accustomed to the noise of the streets, the endless streams of cars, and the variety of passengers who climbed into his yellow cab. The weather that day was typical of spring. Warm sunbeams broke through the skyscrapers of Manhattan, illuminating the glass facades of the buildings. The city lived its usual life. Pedestrians crowded the sidewalks, some hurrying to work, some on business, and some just enjoying a walk. Car horns, snatches of conversation, barking dogs, all this mixed into one big symphony of the metropolis. Mike took the order and looked at the delivery address, 34 Wall Street. So another businessman is rushing to a meeting, he thought, starting the engine. Nothing new. In the center of New York, he drove financiers, lawyers, analysts, everyday people who lived in a rhythm where time is more valuable than money. The walk to the place took only 5 minutes. Mike stopped at the entrance to a luxurious office building and looked at the man who was walking quickly to his car. The man looked like he had just left an important meeting in an expensive gray suit, a snow-white shirt, a perfectly knotted tie, and a black leather briefcase in his right hand. The man opened the door and, without wasting any time, sat down in the back seat. 750 Lexington Avenue. As soon as possible, he said, without looking up from his phone. Mike nodded slightly and stepped on the gas. As soon as the car started moving, the passenger started talking loudly on the phone. Look, Brian, I can't discuss this now. Just send the documents to the lawyer. He will check everything, he said irritably. Yes, I will be there soon. No, don't worry, we will close everything on time. Mike glanced in the rearview mirror. He could tell the passenger was the type, a business person who couldn't stand being held up. They always spoke louder than they needed to, they were always in a hurry, they always looked at their watch, and they were always texting while staring at their phone. The city was busy, but Mike knew how to avoid the gridlock. He turned onto Park Avenue, slipped through several quiet streets, and within 10 minutes he was at a tall building on Lexington Avenue. Here we are, sir, Mike said, slowing down. The man didn't even look up, continuing the conversation. He put his hand in his jacket pocket, pulled out a $100 bill, and held it out. No change needed. Thank you. With these words, he opened the door and quickly got out of the car, still not looking up from his phone. Mike wasn't surprised. It happened often. People, especially businessmen, value time more than money. He glanced at the bill, shrugged, and put it in the glove compartment. As he sat in the car, watching his passenger quickly enter the building, it suddenly occurred to him, this man hadn't even looked at him the entire ride. Just 5 minutes ago, he was sitting here, shouting into the phone, throwing money and leaving, as if this taxi driver didn't exist. Mike sighed and looked at the taxi app. The next order was already waiting. He stepped on the gas again and continued working, not even suspecting that this day would bring him more than just a simple drive around New York. It was the end of his shift, and Mike Anderson was already starting to think about how he would go home, order a pizza, and finally relax after a long day behind the wheel. He hated traffic jams, but he hated the monotony of his job even more. Every day was the same: orders, passengers, stops, traffic around the city. It all merged into an endless cycle that he had not enjoyed for a long time. He parked outside his small Brooklyn home, turned off the engine, and stretched his tired back. It had been a long day, but overall a good one. Mike pulled out the bill he had gotten from the businessman on Lexington Avenue, looked at it, and grinned. Sometimes, passengers throwing money around when they were late for appointments didn't care. It was just another part of his job. He was about to get out of the car, but something made him stop. He glanced at the back seat, where one of his clients had just been sitting. There was a black leather case lying there. Mike frowned. He clearly remembered that this briefcase belonged to the same businessman who had rushed out of the car. Damn, he muttered, turning around and picking up the briefcase. It was heavy, the leather felt nice, expensive. Mike turned it over, checking for a tag with the owner's name on it, but there was no identifying mark. So what should we do with this now? He said thoughtfully to himself. He looked at the briefcase again. It looked like it belonged to someone important. It wasn't your average document briefcase that you could buy at any store. It had a combination lock, and there were metal inserts on the corners secure, protected, clearly meant for important papers or something valuable. Mike ran his finger over the lock. He had two options. Just keep the case and see what's inside. What if there's a ton of money there? Who'll know? Try to find the owner and return it. He frowned. He was dying to know what was inside. Thoughts of thousands of dollars in there flashed through his mind, but he quickly brushed them aside. Mike was not a thief. Yes, he worked as an ordinary taxi driver. His salary was far from his dream, but this did not give him the right to appropriate other people's things. Okay, we need to find the owner, he muttered. He took out his phone and opened the taxi app. Usually, it recorded the history of trips, and perhaps the contact of the last client was saved there. However, to his disappointment, the order was anonymous. The passenger paid in cash, and no information about him was left in the system. Mike swore under his breath. Then he looked at the case again. Maybe there is something inside that will help find the owner? He hesitated, but then decided to open it. The lock was more complicated than he thought. A 3-digit code, but no clues as to how to pick it. Of course, it won't just open like that, Mike grumbled. He ran his fingers over the surface of the case again, and then his gaze caught on a small card sticking out of the side pocket. He pulled it out carefully. It was a business card. Andrew Clark, financial advisor, 750 Lexington Avenue. Mike froze, recognizing the address. This was the very building where he had dropped off the businessman. He looked at the case and grinned. Well, Mr. Clark, I think I know where to find you. Mike stared at the card for a long time, running through possible scenarios in his head. He knew that this was a rare situation. The case was obviously something important to the owner. Perhaps it was just documents, or maybe something more valuable. He remembered how the businessman, Andrew Clark, was in a hurry, how tensely he spoke on the phone. Maybe he hadn't even noticed that he'd left the briefcase? Or had he already realized, but didn't know where to look for it? Mike looked at his watch. It was almost 10 o'clock. He didn't really want to go back to the city center at that hour. However, he felt a strange uneasiness. He looked at the case again, then at the business card, then back at the case. What if there is money inside? The thought flashed through his mind and he immediately pushed it away. No, he couldn't do that. Of course, you could just keep the case, try to open it, or even sell it. Andrew Clark might never know where he left it. But what if he's already looking? Mike sighed and glanced at his phone screen. Should I call him? He looked at the card again. The phone number was printed in the lower right corner. Call now? Or wait until the morning? He got behind the wheel, put the case on the passenger seat, and just sat in silence for a few seconds. Then, gritting his teeth, he took out his phone and dialed a number. Beeps 1, 2, 3. Yes? Who is it? A tense voice came from the receiver. Mr. Clark? Mike said. There was movement on the line, as if the person on the other end had thrown something on the table and grabbed the phone. Yes. Who is it? The voice was sharp, impatient. My name is Mike Anderson. I'm a taxi driver. You were in my car today, and I think you left your briefcase. There was silence. Then a sharp breath. What? Clark's voice changed instantly. Case. Black leather. You left it on my back seat. God, a heavy exhalation was heard. You didn't open it? Mike frowned. No. Where are you now? At home. In Brooklyn. Can you bring him? Immediately. It's very important. Mike looked at his watch. It was late. He had planned to rest, but there was real tension in Clark's voice. I can come in the morning if... No! Clark interrupted sharply. I'll pay you for the ride. Just bring him right now. Mike thought for a second. Okay, but it will take me about 20 minutes to get there. I'm waiting in my office. 750 Lexington Avenue. Just ask for me at the front desk. The connection was lost. Mike put his phone down, glanced at the case, and exhaled heavily. What is so valuable about it that a person so desperately wants to return it immediately? Mike turned on the headlights, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. New York at night lived its own special life. The streets were no longer so clogged with cars, but the city was still noisy and glowing with millions of lights. Neon signs, taxi horns, street musicians on the sidewalks, all this created a unique atmosphere. Mike drove through familiar streets, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't get Andrew Clark's tense voice out of his head. Something about his reaction was alarming. The man was clearly in a panic, which meant there was more to the briefcase than just documents. He deliberately chose a shorter route to get there faster. He wanted to hand over the case as soon as possible and get rid of this strange feeling. 20 minutes later, he pulled up to 750 Lexington Avenue, a modern high-rise building that apparently housed Clark's office. Mike parked in the driveway, turned off the engine, and picked up the briefcase from the passenger seat. Now that he held it in his hands, he could feel how heavy it was. He headed towards the entrance. The inside of the building was luxurious. White marble walls, glass doors, a huge chandelier in the lobby. There was a woman in a formal suit at the reception desk who looked at him as soon as he entered. "Good evening, sir. How can I help you?" "I'm looking for Mr. Clark. He's waiting for me." The woman frowned and looked at the computer screen. "What is your name?" "Mike Anderson. Tell him I brought the case." Her eyes widened for a second, but she immediately returned to her professional expression. "Just a second, let me clarify." She dialed an internal number and spoke briefly with someone. After a moment, she nodded. "Go up to the 22nd floor. Mr. Clark is waiting for you in his office." Mike thanked her and headed towards the elevator. He felt a strange tension as he rose. It all seemed too dramatic to him for a simple forgotten case. When the elevator doors opened, he found himself in a corridor leading to a large office with panoramic windows. Andrew Clark himself stood in the doorway. The man looked broken and agitated. His tie was disheveled, his shirt collar was loose, his eyes had dark circles. It was obvious that he was nervous. "Oh my God, you're here!" he said, quickly approaching Mike. He held out his hands and Mike handed him the case without a word. Clark squeezed it as if it were something priceless. "You have no idea how important this is," he muttered, stepping back. Mike tilted his head to the side, watching him. "I don't know what's in this case, but judging by your appearance, I've done you a huge favor." Clark took a deep breath, then looked at him with genuine gratitude. "You have no idea how much." There was silence in the office for a second. And then Andrew Clark made an offer Mike didn't expect to hear. Andrew Clark sank into the chair behind the massive oak desk and wasted no time in entering the combination to the briefcase's combination lock. His hands were shaking slightly, and Mike noticed a bead of sweat trickle down the businessman's forehead. When the lock finally clicked, Clark quickly opened the lid, peered inside, and breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank God," he muttered. Mike stood in the doorway, watching him. "I take it this isn't just a bunch of papers?" he chuckled, crossing his arms over his chest. Clark looked up at him, and for the first time since they had met, his eyes showed not only tension but genuine gratitude. "You're right, Mike," he said, closing the briefcase. "If it had fallen into the wrong hands, I would have lost everything. Well, now you have it. So you can sleep peacefully." Mike was about to turn around and leave, but Clark stood up abruptly. "Wait." Mike stopped. "I can't just let you go." Clark walked over to the closet, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick white envelope. He handed it to Mike. "Take it. It's the least I can do." Mike looked at the envelope. It was heavy. He didn't have to look inside to know it was a large sum. "I didn't expect a reward," he said, but was in no hurry to refuse. "I know," Clark nodded. "That's exactly why you deserve it." Mike took the envelope and put it in his pocket. Thank you, Mr. Clark. But honestly, I just did what any decent person would do. Clark chuckled. Believe me, not just any. He thought for a second, then added, by the way, you are a taxi driver? Yes, but to be honest, I'm not thrilled with this job. Clark nodded as if thinking about something. I need a personal driver. Someone I can trust. Someone who not only drives well, but also knows when to keep quiet and when to ask the right question. Are you interested? Mike froze. Are you offering me a job? Exactly. The salary is several times higher than in a taxi, flexible hours, plus no communication with drunk passengers. Mike thought about it. It had all happened too fast. This morning he had been an ordinary taxi driver, and now he was being offered a job he had never even dreamed of. He looked at Clark, then at the case. Honesty changed his life. I think this proposal is worth discussing, he finally said, holding out his hand. Clark smiled and shook it. Welcome to the team.